The Indo-Pacific region is a pivotal force in shaping the emerging global order. From shifting power dynamics to economic and technological advancements, it holds the key to the future of global governance. Security challenges are on the rise in the Indo-Pacific, including cyber attacks, terrorism, and pandemics. We will uncover the complex array of risks facing the region. Technology is transforming the Indo-Pacific. Geospatial tech, AI, 5G, and the Internet of Things are revolutionizing our world. We will explore how these advancements shape the region's role in the global order. As the world enters a new era of multipolarity and decentralization, the Indo-Pacific region stands at the crossroads of global governance. Join us as we navigate the exciting and complex landscape of the Indo-Pacific and its role in shaping the future of our world.
My friend Keith Masbeck, who was supposed to be moderating this session, could not be here with us, although he's checked in and was almost about to take off, but something urgently, for some reasons, he had to go back. And he's doing well, so there's no problem on that front. So I'll be actually standing in for Keith Masbeck. It's very difficult to stand in for him. He's a charming personality and brings a tons of experience of geopolitics or the world order. So this session is going to be on role of Indo-Pacific in evolving world order. World order is evolving. I think that's inevitable. It continues to evolve, it continues to change, and so as its determinants. I think we are living in a multipolar world. And when I'm talking about multipolar world, I don't mean the in true sense of academic language of multipolarity of earlier blocks, but I'm talking about multipolarity in terms of determinants of the world order. The determinants of the world order have changed drastically in last 15, 20 years. And the issues which we never felt are going to be the driving factors for the world order are the issues like climate risk, are the issues like food and agriculture security, are the issues like growing natural disasters, but also are the issues in terms of consumption, in terms of the markets, and in terms of the supply chains. While we are talking of aviation industry to be probably one of the largest polluter of this world, I just read about 3 days before a report which actually talked about that computing farms actually are causing more you know challenges to the climate change than the aviation industry. That's a very recent report which also talks about digitalization itself has its own energy consumption demands and its own challenges. So the new determinants of the world order and the new players of the world order and new alignments of the world order, and a lot has changed in the last 3 months for sure, or 3 years. And what I felt is the elasticity of this world order, is pretty much going to be driven by the basic economic principle of supply and demand. And elasticity of demand or elasticity of supply is going to be the driver of the real driver of the world order. And that is why Indo-Pacific has a big role in the new world order. It is definitely at the center of gravity for the regions, as I said, supply and demand. It is the biggest supplier in terms of the produce products, it is also the biggest consumer of the products. So these are the economic, factors in our current scenario. Well, I have great, honor in welcoming my friend Robert Cardillo. Robert Cardillo is the former director of National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Robert, may I request you to come on the stage, please? Robert is, after having been a seasoned, expert and leader in the field of geospatial intelligence, is currently the chair of United States Geointelligence Foundation. He serves on various boards. He's also the chairman of the Planet Federal. And what I've experienced in my relationship with him, he was the one who actually provided a big fillip to the engagement, or I would say proactive engagement with the commercial world while he was the director of NGA. And he initiated several programs which actually allowed the commercial work to companies to be a partner, a long-term partner. He believed in the fact that he needed to nurture and develop reliable and dependable commercial sector, which can help him concentrate on much more strategic goals. So, Robert, thank you very much for being here today. He's our keynote speaker. Allow me to welcome Brigadier Arun Shehgal. He is a PhD and he runs the Forum for Strategic Initiative, very distinguished fellow of geopolitics, and he is one of the thinkers. So Brigadier Arun Shehgal, may I request you to come on the stage, please? So he's one of the think tank leaders and he matters in several important initiatives. His voice and his thoughts are very, very valuable for building a defense strategy for the country. I would also like to take pleasure in inviting my friend Hirokazu Mori. He's the Chief Strategy Officer of War Space in corporate Japan. Hirokazu, he's also the VP of Business Development at Blue Abysses. He's a CXO advisor to Space Target of Japan. And he's one of the leaders who is not only technologically very advanced, but also politically and nationally very connected. And he's someone who is part of the strategic think tank or strategic leadership of the Japanese government and the commercial sector. Not least, I have an extreme pleasure of inviting Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, former ambassador and visiting faculty at Center for Policy Research. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1980. He served in various departments, but one important department which is relevant for us is that he was also at the Ministry of Defense as Joint Secretary of International Cooperation, and he worked for United Nations, at the United Nations. And he has been actually in various, important, countries like Afghanistan, Syria, Myanmar. I spent a lot of time in Defense College. And since he's ambassador, I know that he definitely has a very valuable thoughts on the role of the world order and the Indo-Pacific. So we have got a great panel. The format would be where we will hear from the keynote speaker, Robert Cardillo. We'll have about 15 to 20 minutes for him. And after that, we will hear from other speakers in about 8 to 10 minutes. And I'll try to do my best to have some questions for each one of you. Thank you very much, sir. And with this request, Dr. Robert Cardillo to present his address.
Thank you, Sanjay. And let me just start there for a second and add my personal thanks to you and your team for creating this opportunity, this important conversation, this necessary conversation, and for being such an advocate for our profession and our industry. So Sanjay, you and your team make our profession stronger, and we're all of us are better for it. Before I add my remarks to the wonderful setup we had this morning about our important conversation here today, I have to briefly recognize the fact that it is 6th of June, and literally about this time, 79 years ago, there was a historic flotilla, an airborne operation moving from England to the coast of France. And it was the beginning of the end of a worldwide challenge, a threat that the world pulled together to ultimately defeat. I bring it up for two reasons. One, the momentousness of this date in history. But while not being overly dramatic, I really think that we are coming together in many ways, again, as a coalition, to ensure our future security in ways that do have parallels to that event. So, again, honored to speak with you here today about this topic in this region. And for me, the timing is quite opportune. I came here 2 days ago from Singapore, where I had the privilege to participate in the Shangri-La Dialogue, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year as a forum that brings together government and military leaders to do what it says, which is to dialogue. And you may have seen in the media reports, it was opened by the Secretary of Defense on the first plenary, and it was closed by the Minister of Defense from the People's Republic of China. In between that, there was news and no news because we, the United States and China, presented two views of the world. And obviously, we can't have this conversation without appreciating, understanding, recognizing that global dynamic that's existing. I couldn't agree with you more. This is a multipolar world. This country is a critical part and contributor to that multipolarity. And there's the reality of the rise of China, and I say that with respect, and the current position of the United States in the order. And so while both of the speakers, both of our secretary from the US and the Minister of Defense from China, both agreed in free and open Pacific and Indo-Pacific, and they disagreed, quite frankly, about the definitions of free and open. So I think we have to recognize that we will deal with that as well. The other thing that was helpful for me in Singapore was I got a real appreciation for, and this will sound simple, but this is not just a place on a map. This is home, as we've heard this morning, to more than half of the world's population. And it is growing every day ever larger. And so wherever the statistic is this morning, and you heard a number of them, they will be larger next year and the year after that. And so now I believe is the time for us to have these conversations about how we grow together in ways that are mutually beneficial. Actually, President Biden said himself, and I quote, "The future of each of our nations, and indeed the world, depends on a free and open Indo-Pacific, enduring and flourishing in the decades ahead." And again, I think we can all agree that that is the objective. The challenge becomes in how we pursue that freedom and that openness. The speakers this morning talked about the number of challenges that require our collective action. Climate change, and by the way, if I could leave one thing with you this morning, I'm on a bit of a quest to get us to change the term. I really believe it needs to be climate crisis, because that's what it is. I feel like the word change sounds like something you do in the morning with your clothes, or that the weather does in the afternoon. This is a crisis, and I believe words are important. And so I will use that terminology because I believe it to be true. But beyond that, we've got illegal fishing and economic inequality, and we've got growth and development. We've got the challenge of bringing up those in our that have the least equity today and bringing them into our economies and allowing them and their families to thrive. And we have all of the challenges that were mentioned this morning militarily: sea lines of control, safety of navigation, sustainability of supply chains, et cetera. All of those things are challenges for us all. And given the fact, as I said, that China is rising economically and will continue to do so, and that they have more and more of a diplomatic heft and gravity these days, that we do need to find ways to find constructive endeavors to be helpful to get us to those mutual prosperity goals. Now, to keep up with the deeply embedded forces of a globalized economy, regional stakeholders, such as the 20 countries that are here in the room today, must work proactively to institutionalize the advancement, whether that's technology sharing that you see out in the exhibit area, or it's exchanges of academic papers and research projects. So much of the world is growing more and more open. Now, I'll speak a bit about transparency, which I believe needs to be one of our fundamental objectives. Because while transparency doesn't always lead to agreement, I do think it advances our understanding to where we can at least get to a point of mutual perspective. We could see things, we can sense things in a way that could inform our discussion, our debate, and potentially our agreement. But as we seek that transparency, and by the way, Sanjay was kind enough to talk about my government time. My colleagues that remain in government need to find a way to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because look, I literally joined this profession 40 years ago, 1983. And quite frankly, it was a government-owned and government-operated institution that I was joining. So I went into a building with no windows. I was sent to the basement with no, and stared through a microscope looking at film flats, actual film, of the Soviet Union, because it was 1983 and I worked for the United States. And so that was our focus. Everything I did was top secret. Everything I did was no foreign. Everything I wrote, was kept inside because of the sensitivity of the technology and the importance of the access to space. It was something that very few countries had in 1983. And when we were in a bipolar world, right, it became, if I have something that you don't have, it's an advantage. So it was kept inside. So I just anchor that point 40 years ago and now take us fast forward to today. And look at this room. Look at those exhibits out on the floor. You have commercial companies collecting, radio frequencies. You have multiple companies to include Planet, Maxar, Black Sky, who are collecting electro-optical. Synthetic aperture radar, commercial synthetic aperture radar is commonplace these days. And again, oh, good gracious, we now have satellite companies contributing to space situational awareness, including the imaging from one satellite to another, which just a few years ago, I would have gone into prison for saying that out loud. It was like that sensitive of a capability. So just the enormity of the change is both exciting, it's also daunting, because how then we go forward, I think is critical. A moment about another part of the globe, and it was mentioned this morning a little bit about some of the lessons from Ukraine and Russia's invasion. Many have argued, and I would agree, that it is the most open conflict in the history of our planet. And I think the world is because of many companies that are here in the room. They are shining a light on what used to be government-controlled and government-owned information. And so if you think of the preparations and the run-up to that war a year, 15, 16 months ago, there was many debates about President Putin's intentions and his capabilities and force disposition and whatnot. And in those old days, one would have had to wait for a government spokesman to come to a podium and to give a briefing about the government's view of the situation. And this time, we were able to go on the internet, online, and see for yourself. Now, I'm a career imagery analyst. I have high regard for what one can tell from imagery, but you cannot always tell intent from imagery. You can tell about the fact of. And so as we sat there and debated and discussed whether or not there was going to be an invasion, to me, that conversation, and ultimately what the revelation, the transparency that was provided by commercial companies was directly contributed to the resolve of the world standing up and holding Russia accountable for its actions. Are we all in agreement? Of course not. I just left Singapore, okay? There's many views about responsibility, et cetera. But I believe strongly that it's our role here in this room to do as much as we can to at least provide that transparency, that view. Debates can then happen, and debates will happen, and where one lands at the end could and should be different. And I think that's part of a deliberative process, and I think that's fine. You and I see the same thing, but we understand it differently. That's okay, but at least we have that shared view, and then we can, if we have differences, we can work around those, and I would commend us for doing that today. The other thing, one of the many things, especially as when I put my hat on from Planet, is that there is a new reality with respect to what you call commercial and what you call government/military. To the extent that was even observed by a Russian representative to a UN working group last September. The working group was designed to pursue safe, secure operations in space, right? Norms of behavior that we all could use so that we can use the medium to improve life on Earth. And the Russian delegate, quoted publicly, said, we do not see commercial the way you do. So commercial company, Maxar, they didn't name names, but US commercial companies, let's just say that. We don't differentiate between your capability and the US government's. Well, that was a bracing statement for companies, because the association being, if you have a contract with a country that we are engaged with in, I'll say, competition. In this case, some people are calling it a proxy war. Then I treat you no differently than I would a government asset. I pause for a reason. There's reason to take pause and to think about what that means going forward. And I will say in the US, we're having many discussions as companies and with our government about what that means going forward. I don't have any answers for you, okay? I'm just telling you, giving you one example of the challenges of this new world in which commercial and government are coming together. And let's face it, there's other realities. There's communications capabilities, and quite frankly, space communications provided by commercial companies has much more experience here. They were there long ago, and I think in many ways we can learn from that model about how our governments have interacted with communications companies. And as that communication layer gets better and better in space, whether that's through optical or laser communications, we call it the mesh networks that are being discussed. there's going to be more and more connectivity between that communications layer and the data layer, if you will. Again, whether it's optical, radar, RF, et cetera. So again, we're going to have to think about how those interact and how those play together. Now, let me come back to this region. You know, I just talked about some of the tensions that I sensed or were reported in Singapore. If you go back to the earliest parts of this year, 2023, there were talks about US and Chinese re-engagement. US Secretary of State was talking about a potential trip. The president was talking about engagements on the sidelines of G20 and G7. And then something happened. A balloon appeared over the northern United States. It crossed in via Montana and then floated slowly, as balloons are wont to do, at 65,000 feet, down to South Carolina. And just off the coast, it met its demise with a air-to-balloon missile. I don't know if I've ever said that before, but that's what happened. The only reason I bring it up is that obviously put that whatever momentum existed in those US and China talks, you know, that was lost. And, you know, I think there's a reality again that we've got to acknowledge that. We've got to find a way to work through it. Now, in this case, again, there was great contributions from the room to fully understand that program and to fully understand the context within which that program existed. But in reality, it is something that we'll have to work our way through. There are many examples in the region in which I think we've got great ways to build. This morning, the Quad was mentioned between the US and Australia and India and Japan. And it should be remembered that the Quad really was born out of a humanitarian reality and the tsunami back in the earliest parts of the century. And as we've discussed before, we do a great job coming together, I think, when we're in crisis. We tend to put down our equities, we kind of put aside, you know, my authorities, et cetera, and we move to the trouble, and we do it together. I found this in government, by the way. You'll not be surprised that the US government has some bureaucracies to it, and that sometimes those bureaucracies don't get along, you know, within the government, unless we're in crisis. And we perform much better in crisis, and whether that's that's a combat event or it's a humanitarian event. I would challenge us: how do we harness that cooperation that we do in crisis, but transition it to real time, and maybe we can discuss some opportunities there. Look, as I close here, I am highly optimistic about the future of this region. Without giving any stats, the way I would put it is there's a reason the world is coming to the Indo-Pacific. Because the world is coming out of the Indo-Pacific. What I mean by that is this, quite frankly, this region will be the centerpiece for us going forward. And so kudos again to Sanjay and the team for framing this discussion. I would humbly suggest we will not solve it here in the next couple of days, but I would charge you to contribute as you can, and then upon departure from here, please do take forward the momentum that we create, because this can't and won't be solved in conferences. We can plant seeds. We can begin or build on relationships that we have. We can create new connections between our governments and our industry, but we really must steel ourselves for the road ahead. So with that challenge, I'm again pleased and honored to be my part to contribute. I look forward to our panel's discussion, and I thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Cardillo, for your very comprehensive and full of depth address. I loved your comment in the closing, like people are coming to Indo-Pacific because people are coming out of Indo-Pacific. You acknowledged and emphasized on multipolarity of the world players, and I think very importantly, India and its role, which is the largest, habitat on this planet, and the challenges which you have just articulated, uh, being posed by certain actors, uh, depending upon the political ideologies and economic, I would hesitate to say imperialism, but that's somewhere at the core. And advice of being comfortable in being uncomfortable. You know, that's something which is at the. I think that's something which is very, very valuable and very insightful. I would like to emphasize. I would like to emphasize on this. Change is not comfortable, but change is inevitable. When you do change out of compulsion, then you are reacting. And when you do change out of your choice, then you are proactive. So, I think that's more happier to be proactive and, move forward with ownership of the change. With this, I would like to request my next speaker, Brigadier Arun Sehgal. I must say, sir, I have discussed with you and I really admire your energy and your thoughts. And now floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be present before you and share some of my thoughts. In my brief 10 minutes, I will try to first deconstruct the evolving global order and also posit to you how the Indo-Pacific and the dynamics in Asia are fanning out at this particular juncture of our history. This slide essentially indicates how the current global order is structured. The blue indicates the Western dominated globe, including Euro-Atlantic powers. The centrality of their power dynamics is astride the maritime domain. They stretch from Atlantic to Europe and also move around up to the Mediterranean. In this, United States is also an offshore power in the Pacific, but essentially the centrality of this structure, this power block, which you call the Euro-Atlantic power block or the Western dominated power block, is along the maritime domain. The second power block that is emerging, which is largely in the red over there, that's the Sino-Russian bloc. The centrality of this bloc is that it is a continental domain. Now you see the difference. One is controlling the maritime space up to the Mediterranean, and the other is essentially a continental bloc, but it is trying to push its agenda. The Russian and the Chinese construct along the maritime domains. So, this is the Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific extends from the Western Pacific, East Asia, right up to the east coast of Africa, and comprises of 4 different blocks. We have the East Asia, in Western Pacific, including the Pacific countries bloc. Then we have the Southeast Asia bloc, which straddles the South China Sea. And from there, once we cross the Malacca Strait, we go into the Indian Ocean. And from there, South Asia, Indian Ocean, and then from there we move into the West Asia. This is the most consequential region that everybody has been talking about. I'll try and give you some facts. 70% of the global growth is in Indo-Pacific. 39.4 contributed by China, 15.4 contributed by India, and 20% by the ASEAN and other powers. So when we are looking at the dynamics of this region, they are not driven so much in terms of geopolitics of competition between the United States and led bloc, United States led Eastern Bloc, but on the Chinese. But the question over here is basically this, that it is economically, politically, and in terms of communications, managing supply chains is the most consequential region. And this is why the constructs of competition is highest here, and it is going to remain like this for next at least 10 to 15 years. So when we're looking at Indo-Pacific, we have to get the geometries right. The competition in Indo-Pacific is being based on not only in terms of the big power competition that is United States and China, which we talked about, but it's also an intra-regional competition. The intra-regional competition is primarily because of the attempt by one of the major players in the region, i.e. People's Republic of China, to dominate the area and attempt at creating what they call a Sino-centric Asia. A Sino-centric Asia is the one they would like to dominate, and this domination is not only in military terms, ladies and gentlemen. This domination is economic, it's political, it's technological. So this is what the whole issue is that we are grappling with. So when we're talking about Indo-Pacific, these are some of the issues that we're talking. Now let's look at Asia. I'll give you a bigger highlight of the situation. The Eurasian landmass and China is in deep red. The pink denotes influence of China or Chinese related influences. And that's why if you see Southeast Asia, you'll see that what I call a peninsular or a continental Southeast Asia are essentially dominated by the Chinese. Not so much what I call the maritime Asia, maritime Southeast Asia, which is Philippines and Indonesia. So this is the dynamics at play. So when we are trying to contextualize this region with what's for our discussion today, the issue that becomes important is that if you're looking from the perspective of geospatial and geointelligence capacities and capabilities, the issues that become important today is developing centrality of space, both for economic growth and development. The centrality of space for economic growth and development is the most essential. The military aspect is also relevant, but it comes second, which basically requires investments in satellite infrastructure, navigation systems, communication networks, and developing observation platforms across the region. And the third element of this thing is developing security-based regional partnerships. So Carol talked about quadrilateral. We already have a fair degree of coordination on space-based issues with all the quadrilateral countries. India has good relationship with Japan. We have a good relationship with Australia. And of course, we have with NATO a detailed program for space exploration. So the question basically is this, is that we need to optimize this collaboration to ensure that we not only we ourselves, these 4 quadrilateral countries, but like I said, quadrilateral is a boast of more of a social platform. Quadrilateral is a soft security mechanism which reaches out to all countries in the region. So therefore, the idea basically is this, that develop capacities, develop capabilities which you can share with others, which you can help others. You can help others' growth, developing digitization, providing them with navigational instruments, all kinds of aspects. India navigation system is up to about 1,500 kilometers in the regional area. We need to expand it to Southeast Asia so that they have alternatives. So this is what I wanted to say in my brief remarks. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir, for your remarks. And I think the power, we all saw the power of maps. We went from global to regional to local with the visually seeing who is aligned where and how this change is, developing. I think only observation I will have is that this keeps changing, and the color and the density of the color keeps changing very, quickly too, and that's what we are seeing a lot into the Pacific region, where some of the red allies are converting to the blue allies, and they are in the phase of reducing that. But that's my view. Uh, let's go forward. We have a colleague from Japan, Mr. Hirokazu Mori. We just introduced him. So, Hirokazu, please share your.
Firstly, thank you, Sanjay, for inviting me as a speaker together with a distinguished and experienced speaker. I'm absolutely honored. And today I would like to basically talk about how we see, APAC or Indo-Pacific region for like a commercial space companies seen from, say, commercial sectors in Japan. And it's written here. I'm Hiro, Chief Strategy Officer at Warp Space, but I'm also consultant and advisor at several Japanese company and also Japanese government and also UK government as well. So I talk about from commercial side and what I see from the government of Japan. So today what I'm going to talk about is how geospatial information could be utilized for any issues shared between nations within the Pacific, and also issue of geospatial industry. We certainly have some issues. There are several solutions. Current cutting edge technology can help, and in the end, we have personally have some proposal for how international PPP, so public-private partnership, could be reinforced between nations in the Pacific region. And here, as you can see, there are many issues within Indo-Pacific regions and mutual threats. Obviously, some surveillance and urban defense issues are existing for decades. But today, since the global environment is changing rapidly because of the human activities, you can see that disasters and also like a planetary health or supply chain issues, cybersecurity issues, we have much more problems compared with, say, several decades ago, right? And if I take one example, for example, even a few days ago in Japan, we had, for example, really bad rain, and we couldn't. Most of the bullet train was stopped, and also you see that it's nothing to do with the weather, but you had accident here in India, and you can see that if we can utilize geospatial information to predict those disasters, and also if we can take care of those issues after happening, definitely the damage could be alleviated. And for most of the issues written here, we can somehow utilize satellite communication or Earth observation data, and today we have lots of the commercial data from many, especially from startups, various sensors, not just optical, but as Robert said, sensory capture radar, hyperspectral, RF, shortwave infrared, thermal infrared. Many data could be utilized and fused to analyze, to predict the situation on the Earth and the surface. And Yeah, as I mentioned, the application of Earth observation data, as you probably know, there are several applications here. I just mentioned a variety of sensors is not just five, not just five, but there are several more. But major ones I just listed here: optical sensors, RF, hyperspectral. There, very well-known company in India, which is hyperspectral as well, and also thermal infrared, synthetic aperture radar. All of them could be utilized in different way to predict the disasters, or they could be utilized to monitor the disaster. And you can see that for forest fire, you can basically use optical sensor to see what's going on there. And you see that just last year we had a Tonga eruption, and so communication was cut there. So only way to see what's going on there was actually several meteorological satellites. Japanese meteorological satellite Himawari was also utilized to see what's going on there. And satellite communication was used to basically understand what's going on there as well. And in order to see the dark vessels, those are also one of the biggest issues in the Pacific area. Our radio frequency signal could be used, and usually those signals could be basically seen from satellite, from space. And also flood monitoring, and also any water-related natural disaster, synthetic aperture radar is very, very useful, especially in the rainy area in the southern Eastern Asia. Optical or sensors cannot see what's going on at the surface, but synthetic aperture radar can see it. And there are already several applications of synthetic aperture radar data, and most of them, the data is actually coming from commercial companies in Japan or Europe and East Asia. And well, this is issues of Earth observation data. Even though it looks almighty solutions, we still have lots of issues with Earth observation data. In order to get the data, it usually takes at least like half an hour. Sometimes it takes hours or days. For example, once Japan had a big earthquake about a decade ago, we couldn't really use government satellites because it took more than a week to actually see what's going on there. And we have to really see the situation after earthquake happens, especially within 24 hours. That's where human life is at danger. And also latency, I just mentioned the coverage of the ground stations. It's usually only 10%. Most of the commercial satellites put into low Earth orbit and polar orbit, and most of the ground stations are around the Arctic area. If you do the simple math, you see that only 10% of the time a satellite can communicate with the ground station to downlink the data. So 90% of the time, they cannot really send the data back to ground. And the capacity-wise, these days, optical communication or laser communication is available. RF, it's simply better than RF in terms of that data rate. And also, laser communication doesn't really require regulatory registration, and that definitely accelerates commercial business as well. And you can see also, apart from optical communication, edge computing in space definitely help to minimize the data, to send a lot of data back to ground in a shorter time scale, like 10 minutes or maybe in less than 5 minutes. And this is a little bit of the advertisement of warp space. We do launch relay satellite with a laser link in medium Earth orbit. We basically provide the service to downlink the data within 15 minutes using a laser. And Earth observation operators, anyone who has certain optical communication terminal, they can downlink the data in 10-15 minutes. And the data rate is starting from 1 gigabit per second. And these days, we have those kind of solutions, not just us. There are several companies which provide a laser link in space. And in 5 or 10 years, from space to ground, you may have seen that NASA already did a technical demonstration to downlink the data at the data rate of 200 gigabit. And it's much, much faster than today, right? At least 100 times faster. Right, and I'm gonna skip this, but optical communication has lots of advantages compared to RF. Terminal is smaller, regulation wise it's much better, and data rate is faster. But atmospheric disturbance is one of the issues, and there are so many and several companies trying to solve these issues as well. right? And this is the way how optical communication can change the communication in space. Communication in space is kind of essential for not just for Earth observation, but also for satellite communication, B2B, B2C, and B2G as well. And once new technology is actually utilized, we could use a new kind of cybersecurity methods such as QKD, quantum key distribution. And in the future, we can also do the very far distance communications, such as communication to the moon. And optical communication has certain advantage over radio frequency, right? So the last bit is proposal for how we could work together. And this is a situation today, I think, in APAC, in Pacific region. I think within each nations, we already have a collaboration between public and private. In Japan, commercial companies and Japanese government work together. In India, obviously, in space, help commercial companies in India. And between nations, as discussed many times, Quad, between nations, we already collaborate. But in order to reinforce, this relationship between in Pacific region, we could perhaps reinforce, cross-border public and private partnership, and such as like the way Europe does, like European Space Agency, we could probably imitate those structure to basically reinforce the partnership between public entity and the private companies between different nations. Right? And this is just one advertisement. For example, commercial companies such as us already collaborate with Quad nations. Between commercial companies, we work with US company, for example, Privateer. They do, basically SSA, space situational awareness. We work with Australian company, LabConnect. They also use high resolution optical data. Pixel, we work with them. They utilize hyperspectral data, and obviously in Japan we work with Synspective. They also provide synthetic aperture radar data. And if government help us also collaborate with the government outside Japan, we can also reinforce the collaboration within in the Pacific region. Sorry, we went over time. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Hirokazu. You pretty much re-emphasized on the mutual trust, which needs a lot of cooperation, and especially, we'll appreciate your comprehensive view of the space infrastructure and highlighting a bit about, communication capabilities, which was kind of eye-opener for me that how much of, Earth observation capacity we are probably wasting if we don't have the communication capabilities, and we are not able to make use of each and every pixel which we collect, our satellites collects. Moving on, I would like to go forward with Ambassador Gautam. Ambassador Gautam, as I introduced him, he's a very decorated officer and like in the foreign services. He brings a lot of global, experience, I would say, and he's been to some of the most challenging, terrains of Syria, Afghanistan, Myanmar as the Indian ambassador. So I'm sure he has a lot to share.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay Kumar. I think that description hides the fact that in many cases I was in those countries when things were considerably better. But still, good morning to all of you, and it's a great pleasure and privilege to be here on this at this session of the Geospatial Intelligence Conference. I would like to thank Geospatial, as well as in particular General Chandele for inviting me. Sitting through the thought session yesterday, I was felt a little bit like a fish out of water, with this conversation that was going on amongst the industry representatives and the occasional military officer. But when I thought of it, in fact, actually the issues were much the same as we have always dealt. The issues of secrecy and sharing, public and private, user and manufacturer. And, ultimately, these are the same issues that dog us when we are dealing with any security issues, defense production, R&D, communications, intelligence sharing, everything. And so, at the end, I felt in familiar territory. And I know that all of you, though you are highly specialized experts in your respective areas, I also know that you are very well versed in the geopolitics of the world today. And in the few minutes that I have, 9 minutes that I have, I will try to cover about 4 points, very broadly, very general. Some of it may be a bit unfamiliar in language because I'm trying to explore some different terrain. So the first is, we are talking about geopolitics here, but I must start with, I think, 4 elements that are outside the area of geopolitics, but which impinge on the evolving world order in a very big way. The first, as Mr. Cadillo said, is climate crisis, and I'm glad that you used the word crisis, because in many ways this has the capability. We are on the cusp right now of whether it's something that we can actually control. It may actually go out of control, and it's a big sort of X factor here. The second is technology. And in technology in particular, I would like to isolate artificial intelligence as a factor that once again could take the form of a runaway train and just simply get ahead of us and reach a state where we may not be able to control it. This may sound a bit doomsday, but nevertheless. The third is demographic changes. There is a secular sort of trend in demography the world over that the advanced industrial countries, in fact, are tending to thin out in age and thin out, whereas in fact you have 2 or 3 populous countries that are still at a kind of growth stage, and this is going to impact very highly on the evolving world order. And the fourth, and this is slightly controversial, is the whole issue of what kind of polity, what kind of political system. In fact, we are seeing a sort of general trend towards a kind of, towards a kind of a trend towards greater authoritarianism, greater exclusivism. And in the final analysis, the countries that evolve models that are more inclusive, not exclusive, are likely to end towards more harmonious societies that are also likely to go ahead. So I'm just bracketing those 4 factors as factors that will impinge on the world order, and come to my 3 principal points about geopolitics. First, this whole issue, I think yesterday we had a description about the somewhat artificial distinction between Indo-Pacific as a region and space as a kind of common property of mankind. I think that's very true, but I would like to apply it actually on a much more terrestrial scale with reference to the great elephant in the room, of course, China. I think the West, largely deriving from a kind of Cartesian way of thinking, tends to think of the world in terms of theaters and sectors. Theaters, Indo-Pacific, West Asia, Atlantic, Europe, Latin America, etc. And sectors in terms of technology, economy, politics, military, intelligence. And then spends a lot of time trying to fuse all these things together. But if you look at China, I've never heard of China, I've never seen China speak in terms of theaters or sectors. It is a very holistic approach. So even as we talk about the Indo-Pacific, China is looking for ways and means to escape the Indo-Pacific trap. And it does that by the CPEC, the CMEC, the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. It has not lost track of the possibility of the Kra Canal. It has a geo-economic deal with Iran for billions and hundreds of billions of dollars with strategic undertones. It mediates between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It has the Eurasian, belt and road. It has the Arctic route. So and it makes no distinction between the maritime dimension and the continental dimension. So even as it looks at the Indo-Pacific, while we talk about the Indo-Pacific, it is already thinking of ways and means to escape the Indo-Pacific trap. So I think this is the first point that I would like to make. The second is we often tend to forget that the rise of China was first and foremost an economic rise. And yet our responses to China tend to be pall-mill. Whether it is the AUKUS or it is the Quad, I know it began with a humanitarian intervention, but slowly, very quickly evolved into a potentially pall-mill kind of alliance, and then sort of really came down to a more diplomatic, political, and economic underpinning for this larger kind of political alliance. But the responses have generally tended to be pall-mill. And even when they have moved towards the economic side, they have tended to concentrate on big industry, on big corporations, on the maritime dimension, on supply chain initiatives as a key element of it. What is completely overlooked in this kind of approach is the entire terrestrial aspect of South Asia and Asia in general, and Southeast Asia in particular. Even as we speak, China is effectively colonizing all the areas to the south, to its south, from Myanmar to Laos to, Vietnam, of course, has held out by balancing very neatly the East and the West in this particular case. But essentially, the point that I'm trying to make is that there is a whole terrestrial area, largely agri-rural, largely more amenable to investments in the small and medium sector, in agro-processing, and this applies to the whole developing world. It's not just in the Indo-Pacific region. That, by and large, we have neglected, and that requires very, very different strategies to tap. And these strategies are not necessarily linked to the corporate sector, which most of you represent here, but in fact to what I would call the larger sort of grassroots of our respective societies. Totally untapped. And an area where not only can we invest in the agro-processing and related industries, but is extremely amenable to digital and space-based solutions, particularly harnessing the power of digital technology and space for real life applications. And I think in India, in many ways, particularly in the financial technology area, we have seen many advances that could easily be applied in many other parts of the world. And my last point, which is a little bit of a quibble, perhaps. I think there's a lot of discussion about a bipolar world and a multipolar world. And I think both the description of bipolarity and multipolarity are slightly faulty. And let me explain. So, the world moved from the Cold War bipolarity to a unipolar movement, and now we are not quite sure whether it's a bipolar or a multipolar world. It is not really bipolar. I think we made a mistake by completely omitting Russia from our description of the world order. And I think in some ways we are paying the price for it. In fact, it is not just a bipolar world, it's a tricentric world. By tricentric, I mean not only that there are three major powers, Russia is a power, but also that unlike the Cold War, when both sides actually spoke in the name of a greater common good, spoke in the terms of values that they championed or principles that they upheld, this new world is much more self-centric. My country first, America first, India first, and much more security-centric as well. And to that extent, much less people-centric. So I think the bipolar sort of description was inaccurate, because in fact, it's always been tricentric. But it's also different in the sense that it's not quite multipolar. Multipolarity or polarity is the capacity to influence the world by yourself, not necessarily in association with other countries. All the countries that we today talk as emerging economies, emerging powers, and as potential or real poles in a multipolar world, actually are incapable of acting without the help of one or the other of these two or three major powers. But looking into the future, where are we going? Are we going towards a bipolar world? Are we likely to go towards a multipolar world? And if it's a multipolar world, what are likely to be the poles of that multipolar world? And there, I would say by virtue of the fact that India is the most populous country, it has a favorable demographic distribution in terms of age, it has the army, it has the economy, it has almost everything else that technological growth and advances. It has the potential of being a multipolar country, but a lot would reside on its capacity to address the issue of inclusivity and harmony, internal inclusivity and harmony. Thank you.
Amazingly, I must say that it was really, nobody could actually think here and there. Such an impactful address by yourself, sir. Thank you very much for enlightening us. I think we still have about 7-8 minutes. I will have a quick one question to each one of you. And, what Ambassador just concluded was self-centric world order. And what I said initially about elasticity of the world order, which means that anything which you want to do, you might have to do a bit of adjustment into your alignment based on the topics or the issue which you are addressing. So there is no permanent alignment. It's issue-based alignment which we are looking at, or alliances which we are looking at, which is going to be driving the new world order. So let's take that so Cardillo, what do you think is the most one factor which will define the new world order, or which you think that Are we going to get a new world order first of all, or what is that one factor which really leads it?
You didn't warn me, Sanjay.
I'm
That
sorry.
was, you didn't give me my question ahead of time, so um, I think, while I agree greatly with the description, none of our labels are working. And I think the broad reason is we're seeing a general reduction in the influence of governments across the board. Not insignificant, governments still matter, and the rise of commerce. I think, so it's, I think what we do as commercial entities will drive the future of the world. It makes me hopeful, by the way. I think there can be more harmony that way. And if I had to pick out one thing within that, and I appreciate it's a buzz phrase these days, but artificial intelligence, I think and we are on the cusp of it really changing, I think, everything. How we interact, how we communicate, how we think, how we're informed. And I do worry a little bit that we all quite don't know how to use it well. And so I think that's a challenge that we will have. It's an opportunity and a challenge at the same time. It's a big single thing, but that's my one single thing.
Thank you very much. Brigadier Arun, you had wonderful colors on your slides. So, what do you think is there a possibility of spread of that green towards Southeast Asia? And green is also a symbol of prosperity, I believe so. And I know green economy is something which is so cool and which is so sustainable. So, do you see the spread of the green in the Southeast Asia
Uh,
and what it takes?
See, the Southeast Asia is being depicted as pink, and it's pink because, like I was trying to explain, is that the continental Southeast Asia is immensely under the influence of China, BRI initiatives. We are simply lacking in adequate connectivity initiatives of our own. We have trying our best, trying to make it green, trilateral highway linking India, Myanmar to Thailand. We are trying to develop connectivity from Vietnam right across to Myanmar. Uh, we are investing in ports and other facilities like Sabang. We are trying to develop in Indonesia. So there is a constant effort, not so much to constrain China, but to provide alternative choices to the region. And in that context, I think India is a great player that has the capacity, the capability, and the regional influence to be able uh, to be able to provide people of this region a different kind of a choice. So same goes for West Asia. If you look at our recent initiative, ITU2, the way we are trying to develop trade with UAE, our agreements with Saudi Arabia, the whole ideation is basically is this: to create free and open rule-based systems so that in the whole region, so that the people can make their own choices. Those choices are not thrust upon them. I don't want to go into detail, but if you look at BRI, etc., the whole ideation of BRI is a political to political agreement for which the people pay, and they have no idea why they're paying for it. Uh,
So,
29 rupees is the cost of electricity in Pakistan, whereas it is 8 rupees in this country. And the balance of 21 rupees is the Chinese cost. Thank you.
thank you very much, sir. So that's a great answer. Let's move to my friend from Japan. What do you think? That first of all, thank you for educating us a bit about communication. So, what do you think about what Japanese government is doing for optical communications? So, like, what is Japan doing to address what you just offered as a challenge?
Sure, yeah. So I can probably talk specific about Japan, but Japanese government has been actually heavily investing in beyond 5G and optical communications starting from like last year, this year. Like the scale is like 100 millions starting from, and then obviously on not just for like a civil or commercial use case for defense use cases, Japanese government has started to look into it like quite similar to US or Europe. I think this trend will come to India as well, and that's where I think interoperability or the international collaboration would be needed, and the commercial companies definitely will play a important role. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ambassador Gautam, a little, I would say, like, I'm very much impressed with your talk. I must say that being a student of political science, what I want to ask you, or maybe have your view is that you talked about, uh, demography, polity, technology. But the two things which I believe are very important, one is the economy and the polity as the driver of the world economy, world order. So do you see, like world has not seen actually too much of transformation of the models of governance in last 50 to 100 years. We still following the models of about 100 years before. So do you see with all this technological change and industry 4.0, all that's, there's a need for a kind of new governance model
Well,
or quality model?
I think that's the kind of $1 million question that we have failed to answer for the last 100 years. You had two models. You had a model that would be called the top-down model, and you had a model that would have been called the bottom-up model. And you had a model that could have been sort of more people-centric, alternatively state-centric, as well as corporate-centric. What we have seen, in fact, over the last sort of decades, is that by and large, any kind of model that has been bottom-up, any kind of model that has been basically people-centric, has been simply eclipsed and overcome by much more powerful entities, whether they are the state or the corporates. And so space for people has literally shrunk. And if you put everything together, the kind of power that technology brings, the power that digital technology also brings, in fact, it's an ever-constraining space. In fact, I would say ultimately, from the French Revolution till now, the struggle of man has been the struggle for freedom from oppression. But increasingly, we tend to be moving towards a period which is literally top-down and much more oppressive. And the space for minorities and others is actually, in fact, shrinking. So it's a kind of, I would say, quixotic effort now. But I would still say the answer is to go back to the roots and to people. And in a very small way, I'm trying to experiment with that in a small farm, less than 1 acre in Manipur.
Thank you very much. Let's give a big round of applause to our speakers.